Good evening, and welcome to the No Commercial Potential Show here on Cosmos Astrum Radio. I'm your host, Brad Wallace, and if you're tuning in for the first time, thanks for joining us. I'm happy to say that you found a very positive space here, because on this show we explore the lives of people from around the world, from all walks of life, and from throughout history, who had every reason to believe that their lives would not amount to much, but who are today household, even iconic names. Last week we explored the life and works of the late great Frank Zappa, from whom the name of the show and of my fake band is derived. Early in his career, Frank sought off samples of his music to various record companies, and one of them wrote back, returning his recordings, saying that while they were frankly in awe of his incredible musical ability and creativity, they sadly felt that his work had no commercial potential whatsoever. The No Commercial Potential banner, however, isn't just a clever band name or an event in one musician's life. It's a metaphor for everyone who took their best shot at greatness, and even just their best shot at goodness within their own lives, and were told, you can't do that, by people purportedly in the know about what can and cannot be done. So this show is about the people who faced down the naysayers, some of whom residing even in their own hearts, and if they didn't always realize their dreams during their lifetimes, left something lasting, beautiful, and important behind them for the rest of us. Tonight we're exploring the incredible lifetimes and prodigious, ingenious works of the great Vincent van Gogh. I want to apologize to any British listeners at this point, as I understand that in your part of the world his surname is pronounced Van Gogh. I'm not going to do that. No offense, I'm just not. Vincent van Gogh was an artist who had every reason to believe right up to the very end that his life would count for very little, if anything. He certainly had no reason to believe that his name would be known to posterity some 130 years later, and well beyond that. As with so many others whose lives we'll explore in this program, he was not only a genius at his craft, a master of the artistic lingua franca of his day, but an incredible innovator, playing with the rules of his craft until ultimately he set about rewriting them for himself and for the rest of us. Vincent Wilhelm van Gogh was born to Anna Cornelia and Theodorus van Gogh in Groot-Zendorst, the Netherlands, on March 30th, 1853. Vincent's father and grandfather had both been ministers in the Dutch Reformed Church. While raising the children, Vincent's mother, Anna Cornelia, was also an avid artist. Not long before the Vincent we know was born, however, Anna Cornelia birthed a stillborn son who was also christened Vincent Wilhelm van Gogh. Anna Cornelia suffered from severe depression, so was never openly loving or affectionate toward her children. Vincent seems to have felt like, to his mother at least, the real Vincent was this perfect little angel who was with God in heaven, a mantle up to which he could never live. As a small boy, Vincent would often be taken to the cemetery to visit his deceased brother's gravestone, a stone bearing his own name. We can only begin to imagine how that must have started to affect young Vincent, especially once he could read the words on the grave marker for himself. As an artist, Vincent's mother would often take the children out to natural settings with sketchbooks. Vincent poured himself deeply into the experience, showing ability from a very young age, and trying with all his might to be deserving of the love from his mother that he craved so badly, but so seldom received. He would even take bugs and plants home with him so that he could finish the drawings later. At age 11, Vincent was sent away to boarding school, which he didn't like, but still achieved fairly good grades there. At 13, he was sent to secondary school in Tilburg, where he proved especially talented at learning languages. When the Van Gogh household fell in hard times, however, Vincent was 15 years old. His parents sent Vincent to work for one of his uncles as an art dealer at a firm called Goupil & C. He had already taught himself to read and speak English, French, and German, in addition to his native Dutch, fluently, so that he could sell art all over Europe. With that ability and the ability to travel, he studied the works of the great masters, visiting museums regularly to be that much better at it. His brother Theo, who would be a close and important part of Vincent's life right up to the end, was sent to work for the same art dealer. After leaving high school during his second year, Vincent would have no further formal education. After completing his apprenticeship, Vincent was transferred to one of the branches of the dealership in London. At age 20, he moved into a boarding house run by a widow named Sarah Ursula Lawyer. Her daughter, Eugenie, was 19. Vincent wrote his brother that he loved living there amid the hustle and bustle of London, A bit of legend clouds some of the facts here, though. Some believe, based on the scant of evidence available, that Vincent fell in love with the housemarm's daughter, Eugenie, since they were only a year apart. Others believe he fell in love with Mrs. Lawyer herself. Yet others speculate that he fell in love with both of them. There was even a play about the last theory called Vincent in Brixton. Whatever the reality, we know that Vincent proposed marriage to one of them, only to learn that she was engaged to someone else. Vincent was shocked and tried to convince her to marry him instead. He began to argue his case, asking what was wrong with me. These arguments were purportedly so intense that he was kicked out of the boarding house and told never to come back. In 1875, Vincent transferred to Paris with Goupil C, where he became increasingly religious. In fact, from ages 20 to 23, Vincent started reading the Bible every single day, holding himself to a very high standard of personal piety. Customers visiting the Goupil C gallery were told, however, by him not to buy the artwork. This was obviously the exact opposite of what he was supposed to be doing as an art dealer, so Vincent was fired. This began a period of job searching and experimentation for young Vincent, who tried working in a bookstore for a time. But he seemed to have a problem maintaining focus, often going on long walks. Some estimate he would walk anywhere between 4 and 6 miles every single day. He then decided to follow in his father's footsteps to become a minister, and found a job teaching at a Methodist school for boys, applying to the Amsterdam Theological College at the same time. The school required everyone to pass Latin exams. If he didn't study enough, Vincent would punish himself by skipping meals or sleeping outside. Considering that he was almost fluent in 4 Latin-based languages, we might have expected Vincent to pass the Latin exams easily, but he didn't. He failed them and was denied admission to the School of Theology. Vincent didn't care so much about which church he belonged to. He just wanted to preach the Bible to the poor. So he went to the Evangelical Church of Belgium, which denied him admission to studies there as well. In 1878, he approached the church and volunteered to work in a coal mine in Brussels. Most ordained ministers didn't want to go to Brussels because it was one of the poorest and dirtiest communities in the country. In fact, some were sent there as punishment. But these were the people that Van Gogh really wanted to help. While he lived there, he began to sketch the peasants while they were working in the coal mines, sometimes even tending to the sick. The church had given him a very comfortable house to live in, but there was a local woman who was sick, could no longer work, couldn't afford to pay her rent, and had become homeless. So Vincent, taking pity on her, gave the woman his house, deciding to go and live in one of the coal mining shacks instead. There was no furniture in the shack, and Vincent was forced to sleep on the bare wooden floor with a blanket. For the kindness and sometimes extreme selflessness he sometimes showed, Vincent earned the nickname Christ of the Coal Mines among the people who lived in Brussels. Even though the common people loved him, the church committee was less than impressed. They didn't want someone living in squalor representing their religion, so Vincent once again lost his job and was sent packing. Without any real job skills whatsoever, Vincent realized that the one thing he truly loved to do was paint. Rather than preaching about God and his love for the world, Vincent took to painting his emotions instead. At 27 years old, Vincent wrote a letter to his younger brother Theo, explaining that he wanted to become an artist. So they made an agreement that Theo would send 50 francs a month to Vincent for basic living expenses. Vincent would then send works of art to Theo, who would be allowed to keep any profits made from selling them through the dealership. Vincent was incredibly grateful for the opportunity and often would forgo meals in favor of buying more paint and canvases. Back then, no one really knew the dangers of ingesting lead paints of various kinds, so Vincent would clean his brushes using his mouth. This could only have contributed to serious health issues throughout his life. Vincent still had to push through his depression and his self-doubt, though. He was once quoted as saying, "If you hear a voice saying, 'I cannot paint,' then by all means paint, and that voice will be silent." At this point, we're going to take a break in the epic story of Vincent van Gogh's life to bring you a song inspired by one of his paintings, Irises. Moved by that particular inspiration, at least in this playing, allow me to introduce Iris by the Goo Goo Dolls.
the closest to heaven that I'll ever be. And I don't wanna go home right now. And all I could taste is this moment, and all I can breathe is your light. And sooner or later it's over. I just don't wanna miss you tonight. And I don't want the world to see me, 'cause I don't think that they'd understand. When everything's made to be broken, I just want you to know who I am. And you can't fight the tears that ain't coming, all the moment of truth in your lies. When everything feels like the movies, yeah, you bleed just to know you're alive. And I don't want the world to see me, 'cause I don't think they'd understand. When everything's made to be broken, I just want you to know who I am. And I don't want the world to see me, 'cause I don't think that they'd understand. When everything's made to be broken, I just want you to know who I am. I just want you to know who I am. I just want you to know who I am.
That was Iris by the Goo Goo Dolls, played in honor of the painting Irises by the subject of tonight's episode, the great Vincent van Gogh. You're listening to the No Commercial Potential Show on Cosmos Astrum Radio, and I'm your host, Brad Wallace. Let's return now to the story of Vincent. Vincent fell in love with the wrong person yet again, his older first cousin named Kie Vos Stricker, who had just lost her husband and was still mourning his death. Vincent announced his love for her, offering to marry her and promising to make her happy. This so disturbed Kie that she moved back to Amsterdam just to get away from Vincent. Not easily deterred, Vincent wouldn't take no for an answer. Following her there, Vincent approached his aunt and uncle, begging to speak with Kie because he thought he could still convince her to become his wife. Trying to illustrate how quickly he could convince her, Vincent held his hand over a gas flame and swore to stop talking when he couldn't stand the burning of his flesh anymore. Kie's parents quickly blew out the flame and told him to leave. Vincent then moved to The Hague, the center of the Dutch art movement at the time. At age 28, he completed his first oil painting and sent it off to Theo. While living there, Vincent met what we now call a sex worker named Glacia Maria Hornig, who was also known as Sien. Sien was an alcoholic suffering from syphilis and raising a 4-year-old child on her own. She was also pregnant with another man's child when she met Vincent, so she wasn't working as a lady of the night at that point, as they were then known. But yet again, Vincent's heart went out to women who were suffering. He fell in love with her, once writing to his younger brother Theo that he so enjoyed feeling that he was needed. Accordingly, they agreed to increase Vincent's monthly stipend so that he could afford to take care of her and the children financially. Cien began modeling for Vincent, which was very helpful since he could never afford to hire models. But no surprises, he caught both syphilis and gonorrhea from her. The pain was reportedly so excruciating that Vincent required hospitalization. While he was there, Cien returned to life as a sex worker and to life on the streets. Vincent was already a person with mental health experiences, but syphilis is known to cause mental impairments of various kinds on its own. When Theo learned of this scandal, he threatened to cut Vincent off financially if he refused to end his relationship with Cien. He knew that Vincent had a huge heart and was probably being taken advantage of, so Vincent was forced to end things with Cien, and he quickly left The Hague. In 1885, Vincent painted a piece called The Potato Eaters when he was only 33 years old. Today, it's considered one of his early masterpieces because it perfectly captures the emotions of these farm workers while successfully capturing the essence of their poverty as well. You're listening to the No Commercial Potential Show on Cosmos Astrum Radio. I'm your host, Brad Wallace, and this next song is called Befriend Me by a band called The Potato Eaters.
I woke up feeling lucky this morning when you knocked on my door. Your eyes read like some welcome home sign. I knew we'd be friendly for sure. And I'd come right down, she said, to let you know that I would be around. And you'd come right up, she said. I'd like to show you I can't be counted on. Methinks I spend too much time thinking all alone up here in my room. And it's on nights like tonight, remembering your invite, I can't help but feel like a baboon. I come right down, she said, to let you know that I would be around. You come right up, she said. I'd like to show you I can be counted on. In Lannistown, perhaps we'll go to Massachusetts. We'll have some fun traveling around. Oh, I just know we needn't lose it. Now come right down, she said, to let you know that I would be around. And you come right up, she said. I'd like to show you I can be counted on. Please befriend me. Please befriend me. Please befriend me, baby. Please befriend me. Please befriend me. Be mine forevermore.
And that was Befriend Me by a band whose name was no doubt inspired by one of Vincent van Gogh's greatest paintings, The Potato Eaters. Now back to our story, already in progress. He was very hopeful that his brother would be able to sell it because it was similar to dark paintings by the Dutch masters. Sadly, however, this was not a popular style in Paris, which was where Theo was living and trying to sell Vincent's work. Theo once wrote Vincent sending samples by Monet, whose placid style was actually selling very well. Vincent had never heard of Monet, but was intrigued by his work. When Vincent arrived in Paris, Theo took him to the art gallery where he could see all of the work that he had described to his brother in letters. Vincent was reportedly blown away by the exemplars of the Impressionist art movement. While it isn't immediately plain why that style of art was so popular and why Vincent had swapped out his dark hues for brighter, more vibrant colors, Theo had introduced Vincent to various artists who are still considered masters to this day. Models were very expensive, so Vincent and his friends would pose for each other to save money. This is partly why there are so many self-portraits of Vincent van Gogh. He often had nobody to model for him, so he had to look in the mirror. One exception, a postman named Joseph Roulen, agreed to sit for Vincent, getting into very involved discussions with him. Most of the Impressionists would only paint on days when the weather was beautiful, caring a lot about finding just the perfect light. They also seemed to understand the market very well, so they could sell their paintings making enough money to live for months at a time. They would party and wait for inspiration to strike. But Vincent was the polar opposite in how he created art. Having an almost Spartan work ethic, he was willing to paint every single day in order to get better at his craft. This often put him at odds with fellow artists in Paris because he believed that none of them shared the same passion that he had. And on that note, I take you now to a song called Self-Portrait by a band called Surf Curse, inspired by the Spartan work ethic of our subject tonight, the great Vincent van Gogh. and that was Self-Portrait by the Potato Eaters. Vincent once wrote, "I feel such a creative force in me. I am convinced that there will be a time when I will make good things every day on a regular basis. I'm going to do my very best to make every effort because I am longing so much to make beautiful things. But beautiful things mean painstaking work, disappointment, and perseverance." Teo often had to apologize for Vincent's often abrasive outbursts with other people. The only artist in the group who actually felt inspired by Vincent's determination was Paul Gauguin, who encouraged Vincent to loosen up, and more impactfully, to start drinking a green liquor called absinthe. If you don't know this, because I didn't, absinthe can cause hallucinations, which could only have contributed to yet more difficulties in Vincent's mental health. Always determined to improve his style, Vincent began studying Japanese art. It was almost as if he could see the soul behind the painter, so he began reading a lot about Buddhist philosophy as well. He wished that he could move to Japan, and told the other Impressionists about it. Toulouse-Lautrec told Vincent that the French countryside had a very similar look to Japanese countrysides, encouraging him to move there instead. So Vincent traveled to a town called Arles. It was truly beautiful and motivated Vincent to paint even more than he had before. Once he arrived at Arles, Vincent rented a small yellow house for just 5 francs a month. For long stretches of time, Vincent lived only on stale bread and coffee, drinking absinthe at night. When times got extremely hard, he had absolutely no food, so he started drinking turpentine and eating paint chips. Again, none of this could have been helping Vincent's already severely battered mental health, but it also started causing serious damage to Vincent's nervous system. Teo was worried about his brother, so he paid Paul Gauguin a stipend to live and work with Vincent in Arles. When he found out that Gauguin was coming, Vincent filled up the house with sunflowers so that it was bright and cheerful for his new friend. Over time, the influence of the Impressionists in Paris began to wear off, and Vincent's work became more truly original, arguably the best that it had ever been. At first, Paul and Vincent were getting along just fine as roommates, but as Vincent's mental health continued to suffer, he would initiate arguments with Gauguin, making things increasingly uncomfortable from time to time. One day, Teo wrote Gauguin, advising that several of his paintings had been sold in Paris and sending him several hundred francs. During one particularly bad fight, Gauguin announced that he was taking the train back to Paris. While walking to the train station, Gauguin heard footsteps running behind him. When he turned around, he saw Vincent van Gogh holding an open razor blade. The two friends froze as Vincent seemed to recognize how horribly he was behaving, then turned around and ran away. For himself, Paul Gauguin hurried toward the train station and never spoke to Vincent again. A few hours later, Vincent showed up at the local brothel, the side of his face bleeding. He approached one of the women there, handing her something of which he politely asked her to take good care. It was his right ear. At first, Paul and Vincent were getting along just fine as roommates, but as Vincent's mental health continued to suffer, he would initiate arguments with Gauguin, making things increasingly uncomfortable from time to time. One day, Teo wrote Gauguin, advising that several of his paintings had been sold in Paris and sending him several hundred francs. During one particularly bad fight, Gauguin announced that he was taking the train back to Paris. While walking to the train station, Gauguin heard footsteps running behind him. When he turned around, he saw Vincent van Gogh holding an open razor blade. The two friends froze as Vincent seemed to recognize how horribly he was behaving, then turned around and ran away. For himself, Paul Gauguin hurried toward the train station and never spoke to Vincent again. A few hours later, Vincent showed up at the local brothel, the side of his face bleeding. He approached one of the women there, handing her something of which he politely asked her to take good care. It was his right ear. The stories about him cutting the ear off and mailing it to some lover who had spurned him is entirely apocryphal, and one of those stories that gets repeated so often we come to believe it's true. I think it's called the Mandela effect. In any event, the police came to Vincent's house the next day, taking him to hospital so that he could be treated for the open wound where an ear used to be. When Teo arrived to tend his brother, Vincent was laying in bed and began having seizures. Vincent had become physically weak and completely delusional. Teo later wrote his mother and sisters that he completely blamed himself for not having come to see Vincent sooner to check on his well-being. After 2 weeks in hospital, Vincent was released. He returned to his small yellow house feeling very much alone. So Theo waited until Vincent had time to recover before sharing the news that he had become engaged to be married. Theo's fiancée was called Joanna Bonger, an accomplished piano player who gave public performances while working at the British Museum Library. Theo and Joanna both shared a passion for the arts and were very happy together. However, instead of being happy for his brother, Vincent took it as a sign that he would soon lose Theo's support and that there would come a day when Theo would no longer spend time with him. Gossip can spread like wildfire in a small town, so the denizens of Arles were all whispering about the incident involving Vincent's ear. Many believed that Vincent was a danger to himself and others, so they submitted a petition to have him locked away in hospital, which he was. So Vincent wrote Theo asking if he could be transferred to the Saint-Remy Asylum, which would be a far more comfortable location than his tiny cell. Vincent then sent Theo 2 large crates of his paintings, writing his brother that he realized his life as a painter probably was never going to happen, adding that he hoped he might become employed as a hospital orderly in the asylum or at any other job that he could possibly find. But Theo never gave up on his brother's talent. He knew that the one thing that made his brother happy was painting. So Theo paid for 2 comfortable rooms side by side at the Saint-Remy Asylum, one to be used as Vincent's living quarters, the other as his studio. The Saint-Remy Convent and Asylum had beautiful gardens, which is where Vincent would spend most of his time painting. While there, Vincent managed to stay sober and received 3 meals a day, with which his physical health finally began to improve. Finally, after years of going unrecognized, Vincent received a letter from his brother saying that a number of his paintings would be on display at an art show in Paris. Only one of the paintings displayed there sold for the equivalent of about $119 today. It was the only Van Gogh painting to sell throughout the artist's lifetime. The Red Vineyards near Arles is an oil painting by Van Gogh executed on a privately primed toile de trente piece of burlap in early November 1888. It depicts workers in a vineyard, and it is the only painting known by name that Van Gogh sold in his lifetime. The Red Vineyard was exhibited for the first time in the annual exhibition of Les Vins 1890 in Brussels and sold for the equivalent of 400 francs. I'm going to play for you now a piece of music created by a piece of artificial intelligence called The Red Vineyard, based upon Van Gogh's only painting to sell throughout his lifetime. I say that in a qualified way because, as with so many other facts about so many important people in life, legend sometimes eclipses fact. And there are some who claim that other pieces did sell throughout his lifetime, and that the story about the Red Vineyard is apocryphal and unduly romantic. Whether it is or it isn't, here is a piece of music created by a machine inspired by that work of art. I hope you enjoy it. The Red Vineyard, created by a piece of artificial intelligence. Tell me what you think. Email me about it if you like. DM me on Twitter. I'm curious to know what you think. Vincent worried very deeply that Theo's marriage would come between he and his brother. But it was the exact opposite. Joanna wholeheartedly supported Vincent's art career. When Joanna and Theo had Vincent meet their new baby, Vincent brought a painting as a gift. the blossoming almond tree, representing spring and new life. As Vincent held the baby in his arms for the first time, Theo and Joanna told him the baby's name would be Vincent Wilhelm van Gogh. Overwhelmed by the honor, Vincent cried tears of joy, and there seemed to be true hope that things would get better. With all of his renewed hope and optimism, Theo believed that his brother's health might have actually been improving, so he helped Vincent move out of the asylum and found him a place to live in the town of Overso-Ois. There, Vincent chose an apartment living above one Dr. Paul Gachet, himself an amateur painter and a huge supporter of the Impressionist art movement. Theo hoped that by living with Dr. Gachet, Vincent could live an independent life while still being close to medical care whenever he needed it. Dr. Gachet knew that Vincent had syphilis and gonorrhea, but didn't know about his mental health experiences. While living in Dr. Gachet's home, however, Vincent took the opportunity to paint one of his most famous portraits, the portrait of Dr. Gachet. Here's a song by the same title, from the soundtrack of a motion picture of the same title, The Portrait of Dr. Gachet. For a while, things seemed to be fine. Vincent had dinner with Dr. Cachet and his family and painted portraits of his new friends and neighbors. But on July 27, 1890, Vincent received a letter from Theo where he said that he had been struggling selling Vincent's paintings that month. He was simply venting, never saying or even implying that he would stop helping Vincent financially. Theo even included the usual 50 francs, but the mere mention of financial difficulty sent Vincent into a downward spiral of self-hatred. He felt he was a burden on the ones who he loved the most, and that they would be better off without him. So Vincent found a loaded pistol and walked out into an empty field before shooting himself in the chest. Bleeding and in shock, Vincent realized that he was still alive, having barely missed his heart. So he slowly stumbled back to the house where Dr. Cachet began to operate immediately and sent word to Theo to come on the next train. When he arrived, Theo found his brother sitting up in bed, covered in bandages and smoking his pipe. Theo climbed into bed next to his brother, and they stayed up all night talking over happy memories from their childhood. As they were falling asleep, Vincent reportedly said, "This is just like when we were home. Please take me home." Theo agreed to take Vincent back to their little Dutch village as soon as he had recovered. But that would never happen. Vincent died in his sleep at 37 years old. They covered his coffin in bright, fresh sunflowers. Just 6 months later, Theo died as well because he had secretly been suffering from syphilis. The brothers were buried side by side. Theo's wife, Joanna, was left with almost nothing except their young son and a huge collection of Vincent's paintings. As she went through the crates of rejects, she found what would become one of Vincent's most iconic works, The Starry Night, which he had painted while looking out the window at the Saint-Remy Asylum. At the time, Vincent dispatched a letter about the work, saying, "Looking at the stars always makes me dream, as I dream over the black dots representing towns and villages on a map. Just as we take a train to get to Terrasson or Rouen, we take a death to see a star. We don't get to see a star while we are alive, any more than we can take the train when we are dead. To die quietly of old age would be to go there on foot." And now the song that many of you have no doubt been waiting for, Vincent by Don McLean. The opening line being "Starry, Starry Night," evoking the very painting that made Vincent famous in the hearts of many of us. Vincent by Don McLean.
Starry, starry night, paint your palette blue and gray. Look out on a summer's day with eyes that know the darkness in my soul. Shadows on the hills, sketch the trees and the daffodils, catch the breeze and the winter chills in colors on the snowy linen land. Now I understand what you tried to say to me, and how you suffered for your sanity, and how you tried to set them free. They would not listen, they did not know how. Perhaps they'll listen now. Starry, starry night, flaming flowers that brightly blaze, swirling clouds in violet haze, reflect in Vincent's eyes of china blue, colors changing hue. Morning fields of amber grain, weathered faces lined in pain, are soothed beneath the artist's loving hand. Now I understand what you tried to say to me, and how you suffered for your sanity, and how you tried to set them free. They would not listen, they did not know how. Perhaps they'll listen now, for they could not love you, but still your love was true. when no hope was left inside on that starry, starry night, you took your life as lovers often do. But I could have told you, Vincent, this world was never meant for one as beautiful as you. Starry, starry night, portraits hung in empty halls, frameless heads on nameless walls, with eyes that watch the world and can't forget, like the strangers that you've met, the ragged men in ragged clothes, a silver thorn, a bloody rose, lie crushed and broken on the virgin snow. Now I think I know what you tried to say to me, and how you suffered for your sanity, and how you tried to set them free. They would not listen, they're not listening still. Perhaps they never
So there you have it. You've heard it, now you can all go home. You've paid for the song by listening to me droning on about art history all this time. You've heard the song, now you're free. Just kidding, there's a little more left and you have to stay. Thanks for listening, by the way. It's been a little while since I've thanked you. Again, this is your host, Brad Wallace of the No Commercial Potential Show, and you're listening to Cosmos Astrum Radio. And it's such an honor to be here. To think only about 3 weeks ago, the idea of me having a radio show is completely joke-worthy, dream-worthy, pipe dream-worthy. And I've had a few. But thank you so much for listening. Every single one of you out there listening right now matters an awful lot to me, and matters an awful lot to Cosmos Astrum Radio, and matters an awful lot to everybody trying to reach out the way we do here to people like you out there who are willing to be reached. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Now back to our story. Joanna Van Gogh carefully catalogued Vincent's work. She also collected all of his letters as best she could, which is why we have so much information about the kind of person he was today. In fact, she managed to collect some 651 of Vincent's letters for the benefit of posterity. Even more than that, Joanna traveled across the continent trying to locate Vincent's paintings so that she could keep track of them. Many had written Vincent off as a madman, so they had either destroyed his paintings or given them away. In all, Joanna was able to catalog over 2,100 pieces of art, 860 of which were oil paintings created over the last 7 or 8 years of Vincent's life. This, of course, does not include any of the pieces that were destroyed or misplaced and are now probably lost to us forever. For instance, Vincent's mother, still rejecting him even after his death, burned an entire crate of her son's work. But she lived long enough to learn just how wrong she was to do that, as the entire world started to wake up to Vincent's incredible artistic genius. With Joanna's help, Vincent's art finally started to sell, and his prolific body of work supported his entire family comfortably for the rest of their days. Today, Van Gogh's work is truly worth a fortune. For instance, in 1990, the portrait of Dr. Cachet sold for $82.5 million. To this day, a Van Gogh still fetches tens of millions of dollars. The man whose entire income from his artwork throughout his life was just a little less than it can cost to fill your car with gas today, became an icon, a household name, and still widely recognized as one of the greatest painters of all time. Despite all of his struggles, Vincent van Gogh lived his life with passion. Perhaps too much passion by some measures, but he was only human, with frailties not too different from yours or mine, and I say humbly and especially not too different from mine. But this can be said of Vincent van Gogh. He lived with passionate devotion to the things and the people that he loved. This is witnessed by the fact that even after making an attempt on his own life, he still found reason to live, the hope of returning to his childhood home with his brother, of simply being and feeling at home, which cannot have been easy throughout his very eventful, very creative, sometimes very stormy life. As Vincent once wrote, "It is good to love many things, for therein lies the true strength. And whosoever loves much, performs much, and can accomplish much. And what is done in love is done well. What is done in love is done well." Vincent Wilhelm van Gogh was a true original, not only a brilliant artist by the standards of his day, but one who redefined the standards of his day, and seemingly without a shred of ego about it. He seemed to view himself as a kind of conduit through which beauty passed from another world into this. Vincent died a pauper, wholly dependent upon the stipends received from his brother until the very end, feeling the daily sting of being a burden on those he loved most, but yet bequeathed to his family a fortune and brilliant works of art that clearly became a bequest to all of humanity. If he was not an egotist about his own genius, and all indications were that he was not, then what he had, and perhaps this was the reason why, despite his extremely difficult life, that he is today a household name, what he had was courage. As Vincent himself once wrote, "What would life be without the courage to attempt anything? What would it be indeed?" Thanks so much for listening to this exposition, accompanied by great music, on the life and times of the great Vincent van Gogh. Is it too late to say, lend me your ear? Forgive me, I am a dad. That being said, join us next week on the No Commercial Potential Show for our joint discovery of the life, times, work, and incredibly varied character that is Jim Carrey. I hope you'll join us. You've been listening to the No Commercial Potential Show on Cosmos Astrum Radio, and I'm your host, Brad Wallace, saying thanks for listening, and be careful out there.